Here's the viewfinder assembly, the prism assembly, screen on the bottom. I think you can just about see on this if I get the light right. See all those speckles on that focusing screen? That's all mildew spots. They're trapped between the shiny plastic layer you see there and the ground glass surface above it. So that's why it has to come apart for cleaning. There's no way to get rid of that stuff. It's not on the bottom. If you start wiping at the bottom, you just create damage. So, start getting this thing apart. Just remove the plastic spacer. Sometimes you might find a little metal shim spacer under there as well. Now there's two. That's a little piece of foam rubber that's set up here. It's usually gone very hard and brittle and thus serves no useful purpose anymore. And just pop that down on the mat. I'm relatively safe there because there's a metal edge around here, so the plastic is not sitting on the surface. There are two screws here which hold the aluminium bracket down to the frame. We can take the one out of the back here too, that just holds that mask in place. Now this frame will hopefully lift off. This is a good result. You see it's left the little aluminium tape there, and the buffer's little pads have come off. I'll just glue them back onto here when I'm done. Then we've got some tape around the edges of the prism. Now the purpose of the tape is to keep dust and any other particles from getting into that finder assembly and causing you a nuisance. The adhesive is usually pretty much given up. Alright, so that's the prism has popped off there. I'll just peel that tape off gently. Looking at the prism, you can see here there's a grey looking patch. That's where the silver's breaking down. Likewise on the opposite side in the same position, you see a little patch. That's undesirable, but it's not the worst prism in the world. That'll work quite well. So I'll put that to one side. Just put all my screws and bits and pieces aside there. This is the piece we're mostly interested in. Looking down from the top, you can certainly see all the speckles in that. Okay, so a few more bits of tape on here covering holes. We can get rid of those. Although the adhesive has pretty much given up on that stuff, you can be sure that if it went onto a clean optical surface you were trying to keep clean, it would make a mess. Okay, so the condenser lens at the top here is held in place with a spring clip, and you can see the tabs of it at the end here, so I'm just going to press on those, push them back out of the way. They're just hooked into those holes in the end of the case, and I should be able to get them up. Now there'll be anywhere between 1 and 3 of these little spring things. That one just flew off into outer space, but it won't have gone far. Okay, so the components in here. You have a condenser lens. Now that's symmetrical. There's a spacer. The tall side goes to the bottom. We can tip out this lens, which sits on top of the focus screen, and then we have a mask, and now the 2 pieces left in there are the ground glass and the plastic with the split image finder on it. There are 6 screws around the edge which are holding that plastic piece with the split image in place. They're used to adjust the position of it so that you can get the split image forming neatly in the circle in the ground glass. So you need a small screwdriver to get those screws loose. They will be locked in place with lacquer, but they come loose easy enough. You wouldn't want to be splashing around any acetone around here to soften that lacquer, because it would run onto that plastic screen and ruin it for life. Just trying to clear the slot in that screw. Okay, so they're all clear. Now I'm just going to push on one of the corners with a toothpick just to knock that down out of the way so I'm not scratching the plastic. Here are our components: the ground glass screen, and you can see mildew spots on that. And they're on the ground side, not the clear, shiny, polished side. And here's the split image finder thing, and all of those mildew spots are all clearly on that surface. Now this stuff is exceptionally soft. If you start wiping at it with anything, my experience is that it'll just go cloudy. You can see it's a little bit cloudy in the middle there. I haven't touched that, but it certainly has the look as though it's been wiped with something. Possibly someone has introduced a cotton bud, a Q-tip in through the shutter and wiped at that, possibly in a futile effort to get to those mildew spots which are on the other side of the plastic. So hopefully this will clean up well. I cleaned this up in the ultrasonic finder. This is very, very delicate. Put it down carefully on a tissue or something where it won't be disturbed until you're ready to handle it. I'm going to remove these 6 little screws entirely. That's because I want to clean this all down with acetone to get rid of all traces of the adhesive from the tape and the lacquer that held the screws in place. And if you leave the screws in position, although that would be very convenient because they're not much fun to put back, they will catch on anything you're using to wipe the surfaces, and you'll end up with a large string of little bits of cotton fibre or paper or whatever you're using that you just can't seem to see the back of. So there are 6 of these tiny screws. Make sure you put them somewhere where you'll find them later. That brings us to this thing. Well, all I'm going to do now is get onto this with some acetone and cotton buds and get rid of all of that adhesive and get rid of the 6 spots of lacquer that held those screws in place. Now, make very sure that that plastic piece with the split image finder on it is well away from the table when you're splashing acetone about. Would there be any harm in leaving this stuff on here? Not especially. It's just better to do a nice neat job and not have this rubbish sitting on the surfaces. There's a bit of surface corrosion on that piece there. That's of no importance at all. The prism in this finder, as I said, is in reasonable order as these things go. Looks quite clear apart from a couple of little patches which won't affect it much in use. Often the prisms are bad to look at, but they're fine to look through. I'll just carry on getting this rubbish off and bring you back when it's done. I have this all clean. I'm going to start putting those 6 tiny screws back in position. If I can avoid flicking them off into outer space. If they hit the floor, you'll never see them again. Whoops. Might be one of those times where it's an advantage to have a magnetised screwdriver. You don't need to run the screws right through. They should be not much more than flush on the inside. Otherwise you won't get the plastic screen seated correctly. I've got this propped up here so that it's sitting fairly level. Makes it possible to get these screws in without it being too much of a fight. And one did try and get away on me, but I was able to catch it and drag it back. One last scrape. No, can't get that one square on the screwdriver. Oh, one last thing, try not to cross thread them. It's going through virtually nothing in the way of thickness in that brass box here, so if you cross thread it you'll strip it out instantly. That's better, and it's straight that time. So I'm just checking to make sure they're not sticking out too far on the inside, and back that one out if they do. And with that, those screws back in place and this piece all cleaned and ready for reassembly, now's a good time to start cleaning up the glassware. So the plastic component here, I'm going to clean that suspended in the ultrasonic cleaner. And I've got a one of these clips. I used to know them as bulldog clips. I've mutilated the spring in that so it's not as stiff as it once was. It wouldn't hold paper very well. But you can see I've got that screen suspended in there, so I can just pop this into the rack in my ultrasonic cleaner in clean water, a few drops of ordinary dish soap, and just give it a brief clean. It'd probably be all over in about 30 seconds, probably doesn't need much more than that. And as soon as I've finished with the cleaning, I'll just run that under the hot tap and then use a combination of the rocket blower and a hairdryer to dry it off again. Now the rocket blower, you need to be using that while you're using the hairdryer, because if any little droplets of water are on there and you let them evaporate, they will leave coffee rings on the glass, or on the plastic in this case. If you blow away all the droplets as you're drying it, you don't get that problem. So I'll deal with that and come back with a clean piece of plastic. Well, that cleaning didn't get rid of all of those spots, which is a bit unusual. I'm not sure why they are so persistent. I gave it 30 seconds, which knocked probably 85% of them away. I gave it a minute, which probably knocked another 10% away. I gave it 3 minutes, but I'm still left with a number of speckles on there. So it may well be this screen's just not going to come clean. Well, I've had this apart, I've cleaned those pieces. That plastic screen, a lot of those dots just wouldn't go away. But I've reassembled it now, cleaning the other components to see what the overall effect would be. And actually it looks pretty good. So I'll show you how I went about assembling it and carry on. Well, for my parts boxes, here's another one in a very, very similar state. This is actually from a Reflex S, I think, but the whole process is exactly the same. So I'll just clean up these components and show you how to put them back together. Okay, so we've got a nice clean piece here. Make sure it goes the right way up. The prism should face upwards. Now you'll probably find that there's a tiny circular mark on one edge, both long edges. It's it there, on this case. That faces to the front. This is the front. And the prisms are up. I'll drop this in and check that it fits in there nicely. That's all looking good. Now I can see a little speck of something sitting on that screen there, so I'll take the opportunity to blow that away. Put that to one side. Where's our ground glass screen? Here it is. Now you can quite possibly see some speckles on there. I'll get it to catch the, yeah, you can if I get it to catch the light just right. That needs to be cleaned. Take a soft cotton cloth, and the ideal soft cotton cloth is an exceptionally well worn out and laundered handkerchief. One that's gone around the traps for years and years and years, and your wife keeps threatening to biff out, is just the one you want. Just cleaning this screen with glass cleaner, just normal domestic glass cleaner, nothing fancy, not angel's tears, nothing strange. So here we have our ground glass screen. Now the ground side, the dull side, goes down, the shiny side should be up. So the ground side goes down against our plastic screen. There's some clips in here that you're going to have to push this down past. And that's all seated in there now. Next piece of the puzzle is this mask. That should just drop in. Again, you might need to push it down against those springs. Next piece of the puzzle is this condenser lens. It's flat on one side, convex on the other. The flat side goes down towards those screens. The convex side is up. And again, we're just wanting to clean that with glass cleaner. When you've finished polishing it nice and clean, and it's easy to judge whether you've left any smears on it, make sure you blow off the surfaces, because you may have fragments of cotton left on there, and then just drop that in on the top. Now we've got 3 pieces in there, and you should be able to judge against the light whether you've managed to trap any dust or anything like that in there amongst that stuff. And assuming you haven't, you're fine, you can carry on. If you see a speck of dust in there and it's not on the top surface and it's not on the bottom surface, you're going to have to take that apart and get that speck of dust out. This piece has spacer. This is not symmetrical, and the taller piece here needs to go down against the lens in there. And as you fit this in, this tab sort of fits into that notch. That's job is obviously to conform to the curve of that glass component down there and hold everything in place so nothing's rocking around. Again, use your rocket blower to blow out any dust that might have settled in there. And we have one more glass component here that needs to be cleaned. So I'm just putting some glass cleaner on this cloth, and I'll clean this. And this condenser lens, it's symmetrical. The top and bottom faces are the same curve, so there's no up and there's no down. That's important. You won't get into a mess with it. Just checking that I haven't got any, make sure I've got no smears on there. And again, use the blower to blow out any dust that might have settled and drop the condenser lens in. Now this is tricky, getting this to go in square. Oh yeah, it's dropped in square. It doesn't always, you might need 2 or 3 attempts at that to get it to seat correctly. And then we've got the retainers. That's got a bit of tape residue on that. I'll just get rid of that, otherwise it'll almost certainly take the opportunity to jump onto the glass and cause me problems. Now with the Reflex 3 we had 2 of these retainers, and this one is for Reflex S and it's got 3 of these retainers, but basically it's the same deal. The little tabs go into these slots in the end of the case. And it's to stop the glass from rattling about. Now this one's got 3, as I said. That's probably because of manufacturing tolerances. I mean, if you were doing your job properly, you'd probably arrange it so you only needed 1. It's not an exciting piece, there's no great reason why you should have lots and lots of them, except to fill up spaces that you've left too big. Just checking that all those ends are tucked in neatly. That's looking okay. So all the components are back in. Next thing we want to achieve is to make sure that the little split image prism is in the middle of that circle in the ground glass. And it's looking fairly good. I need to move it this way. So I'll tighten up the screws on this side first. That'll push the prism across. Yeah, that's much more in the centre that way, and now I need to move it this way. So I'll get this screw at the end here and wind that in. Until I have the prism centred in that window. When I'm happy I've got it centered in the window, it's just a case of tightening up the opposing screws so that there's no space for that plastic component to move into. Now when we started with this, of course, these components, these screws, were locked in with a touch of lacquer, and that's something that we'll need to do further down the track. The lacquer I use for doing a job like that is clear nail polish, which you'll be able to find down at the mall or possibly even the supermarket, and just buy the cheapest stuff you can find. And that screw is not really wanting to move, and just checking it as I go to make sure I'm not moving the screen the wrong way. Alright, that's looking pretty good. So at that stage we've got a nice clean screen, no specks in it, and that means that it'll be nice to use, because you've got to remember that the focusing screen is at the plane of focus. Any defect to the focus screen will be immediately obvious when you're looking in the finder, unlike defects in the prism or the reflex mirror, which are outside the plane of focus, and they might look ugly to look at, but you're not looking at them when you take a photo, you're looking through them. Okay, so that's how you put those components back together. Here's that reflex prism that I took that screen from. You can see here that the silvering on that prism has deteriorated to quite a high degree. I don't know whether you can easily see there, but there's a patch of dark shading about here. Looks like a fingerprint. It is a fingerprint. It's etched all the way through this coating at the top from that fingerprint that you see on the top of the prism there, on the paint. So that's just from someone handling this like this, and the perspiration and skin oils have etched right through and corroded the silver on the inside, on that prism face. Just shows you how careful you've got to be handling this stuff.